spent so much time playing Call of Duty is because I was, I guess, obsessed with quick scoping. So I would just spend a lot of time trying to maximize my ability to do that, which took took focus away from the repetitive, monotonous, nature of the gameplay itself.
So you and Brad are both dirty quick scopers, and you're part of
Yeah,
the reason that I hate the game because I'm an AR guy. I love
yeah,
ARs. Like in Modern Warfare 2, the ACR,
yeah,
I could absolutely destroy anybody at any range because that gun had so little recoil. If you had it
yep,
set up properly, I could
yep,
laser people everywhere. So there's no point. If you were in Modern Warfare 2 and you weren't quick scoping with a sniper, you're done. Now if you are,
yep,
then I'm done. But
yep,
yeah, so the I definitely also am of the opinion, when I first heard Rogan talk about Quake, I think is what he was really addicted to.
yep,
It was probably at least 5 years ago, and I was like, whatever. I was still balls deep in video games, but
yeah,
about a year ago, what he said, not even thinking about it, I arrived at this conclusion on my own that video games are toxic for me because I'm so prone to hyper focus, and so all I am is just one good video game release that I become obsessed about, away
yeah,
from throwing my life in a hole and just playing
yeah,
video games and neglecting pretty much everything else. So when he
yeah.
said that, it didn't motivate me to change, but in hindsight, after arriving at the same conclusion myself, then I was like, oh, I understand what he's talking about. I have no control over this. The only way I can control it is to be like, no, I'm only going to play these games that I've already kind of got an established relationship with. I know I won't get obsessed with them again, but I try to
Yeah.
avoid new games because it's better to create controls that prevent you from doing something bad than just to rely on willpower and tempt yourself and constantly expose yourself to the temptation and have to always be like, no, no, no.
Yeah, no, that's I've had so I grew up most of my life playing video games. Originally, it was a mechanism for it was like outsourcing the labor of parenting. So I got because I was so attached to them, it was very easy to hold my attention. And something I don't hear talking be I don't something I don't hear talked about often is how video games are a complete dissociative. We associate that idea of dissociation with drugs.
Yeah.
And so essentially what that means is that when you're playing a video game, it completely dissociates you from your reality in order to efficiently play the game.
Uh-huh.
You can't play a video game and have like half your focus on the game and half your focus out where you'll get nothing accomplished in the game.
I
Um,
I can
so
attest that it's escapist behavior because that's why I was doing it.
Well, so this is the thing. It's like so video games are essentially mechanisms for us to play out simulations of specific environments, circumstances, and limitations. So like if you think about video games as a tool, very similar to the way in which our society treats like the cell phone, it was a technology that completely changed the way we interact with ourselves in the world with no responsibility or discipline associated with it, right? There's no master craftsman teaching the population how to responsibly use the tool to avoid individual, let's say, evil or suffering, or that by association. So in my own experience, I had to learn to separate my uh, dislike for reality from my enjoyment from video games. And then I had to recognize that it wasn't just some evil that I need to absolve myself of. This is actually something that I love, that I see value in, that has tremendous value to not only connect people, but to build meaningful relationships.
Hmm.
So the necessity for discipline or responsibility around it became very obvious to me. I highlighted it because I love playing video games. I love the connectivity that allows us, especially in a world of over connectivity, yet reducing meaningful interaction. You know what I mean? So, very similarly, like I have to police the amount of time I can spend on a game because when a new game comes out, especially if I'm excited for it, it's like I'm ready to invest all of my time into it. Responsibilities? What the fuck's that? There's this new game coming, and I'm willingly going to sacrifice
Yeah.
whatever I got going on to make time for it.
Yep.
And
Diablo 2
you know,
drops, and like my brother took a week off from work. I wound up taking several days. And there was like 8 of us, and we just hammered. So
and
I got something to throw at you. We could do dual streams instead of just sitting down and having conversations. We could potentially get set up to play video games so that there's visual entertainment, and then still have conversations like this. And then you're not just playing video games for no reason. Like the reason I'm streaming is just because I'm like I would rather engage with other people about the video game than just play silently at my house, either with people or by myself. Like I like the idea of discussing builds, discussing play styles, and hopefully people tune in at some point and want to listen. And it would just be so much more interesting if I'm not sitting there waiting for interaction from the chat to respond to. But if you and I are engaged and people can tune in and get to watch video games and listen to intelligent discourse about whatever's going on at the moment, you know?
yeah, no, I'm for that for many reasons. One, I think the video game culture could use that kind of shift and the kind of content that's around it. So I'm all for it. Also, I think it would be good for the various algorithms that distribute content,
You got it.
because
You got I like the
I
idea
mean,
with reaction to the podcast because that's another excellent idea, my friend.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, those are my first two thoughts. I enjoy playing video games and I enjoy this discourse, and I often do both together. Like I
Mhm.
make it like, especially when I'm playing competitive like games or like fighting games, when I'm talking to people I play against, all of whereas like historically I would have like tried to jar them and get a reaction, especially if I was winning over and over again. I want to test their ability to, let's say, conquer their ego.
Mhm.
Now I try to facilitate that worldview by showing the path to it, trying to have my competitors recognize that the real enemy is themselves. They're playing to improve against their previous self, and every worthy opponent is an opportunity for growth. So, especially when I play fighting games, my favorite thing is coming across somebody who is extremely more skilled than me and enjoys going back to back. But if you take that same person and they're full of ego, and they're choosing to take their position of, let's say, competency, and use it to, let's say, support some, like, oh, I'm the best, you
Yep.
know what I mean, like to
Yep.
fuel the ego as opposed to set it free, you know what I mean, like that, I don't really enjoy playing against that kind of person. So I try to be a model for the kind of gaming culture I wish to see. um
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand that the ego is not so you need ego to survive. Like especially in a
yeah,
competitive environment, you have to believe that you're capable of being a peer with the people that are around, and you can compete
yeah,
and you can be part of the group. But where ego becomes hugely toxic, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about, only in the psychedelic world really do people understand or talk about the idea of ego death and fully separating yourself, even if it's only momentarily, from being so invested in yourself that you can't think of others. I mean, this is what ego gets in the way of, is having empathy or sympathy for others, because everything is about you. And as long as everything is about you, you're never going to understand how to truly interface with other people and recognize that there are people just as good as you.
yeah.
You can let go of that I'm better than everybody, but only through the process of confronting your own ego. No one can get you to do that. That's a
This is
personal
true.
journey.
This is true. So I frequent a lot of like podcasts where they talk about psychedelic experiences, psychedelic information and wisdom, and something that I mean, they often talk about ego death. But something I think is missing from that conversation is the idea that the ego doesn't really die. It goes through this process of death, rebirth, birth, life, death, birth, rebirth. You know what I mean? Like it just like all energy and matter, everything is conserved. There's no creation and destroying. You don't destroy your ego. You just allow it to revert to its form of nothingness so that it can build upon something more useful. The reason why ego death occurs is because let's say, whatever you're tapping into when you're in a psychedelic experience, or you have any experience that causes ego death, um, when that happens, it's like your entire essence recognizes that what we call our ego, or whatever you identify as your ego, is no longer serving you. Therefore, you have to destroy its power over your identity and actions.
Hmm.
And you do that by separating what and who you are from, let's say, what we identify as the ego. And as a consequence, a new one is born. And there's not a lot of, like, I think all this, like, self-help conversation, this dialogue about how, like, how how there's a necessity for, like, a rite of passage for boys to become men. There's no structure, no infrastructure in our society to facilitate that development.
Not anymore.
Just like,
Yep.
yeah. So, like, the process of building upon a previously deceased ego is no longer here, because it's not that there's no useful idea for it in our modern culture. And I think that is in part due to the dogma of science and the perpetuation of hidden of misinforming and keeping the population subjugated. Like, I think there's many people who have this information, may not be able to articulate it, or if they do, they choose to not. You
So
know?
yes, I agree, and I think that one of the interesting things about trying to explore that side of life is that a lot of people try to lump that in with other drugs that are going to alter your state. And so a lot of drugs impair you. But I would say that this recalibrates your senses. And I don't experience anything that is less real or meaningful uh, in that state. I'm not at a loss of my
What
capacity to
state
think.
specifically?
What's that?
What state specifically? Like a
Oh,
just like a
I'm like
psychedelic?
in a psychedelic state, like
Yeah, yeah,
taking mushrooms or LSD. I
yeah.
haven't experienced DMT, but Joe Rogan has talked about this, and many others have talked about that on DMT. You actually interact with entities, and this is what kind of was like the end of his obsession with aliens and UFOs. Was he's like, these are the aliens. I'm talking to real things that are giving me feedback about myself in this space, and now the University of Colorado is trying to elongate the DMT experience because it's only a 10-minute window if you smoke it. They're doing an
Yep.
IV drip and trying to keep people in this space. And when they come out, they're describing similar experiences, similar independent experiences, not as a group, but reporting similar entities, similar communications, similar types of feedback that they're getting about how they're living their life in this space. So for people that, because we all live in this productive um, state of like we need to get things done, and the
Yeah.
primary goal is production, not
There's
thought.
shit to be done. We need to organize people to get it done.
Yeah. So my thought is that, and Joe Rogan has said something similar, but it's like it's so easy for people to dismiss that state, but until you've experienced it, I don't think that you have the right to speak about whether or not that's any less real, because right now, your senses are not capable of perceiving empirical, objective reality. Our senses are simply developed to perceive threats and to avoid them and survive. So you spot an animal, you spot a cliff. We're adapted to not fall off the cliff or get eaten by the animal. But the
Yeah.
truth is,
Historically speaking, we make judgments based off of adaptation and survival.
mhm.
Sure. Yeah.
But the truth is, our biological senses are limited. We can only perceive with our ears a limited sound range. There's much more sound frequencies than we can hear. With our eyes, we can't perceive infrared. We can't perceive different bandwidths of light that certain specialized cameras, like a thermal camera or something like that, can perceive. So
This is true.
for people to be sober and say that I understand my objective reality just shows how ignorant and how little thought you give to what you're actually perceiving. You're perceiving just what your body is adapted to perceive, not the rest of everything that constitutes the world. So what if taking psychedelics just turns the knob just a little bit, and now you can perceive this whole other bandwidth of thought that is not available to you when you're focused on survival. This just,
Yeah.
is just a little adjustment. You change the radio station or something like that. And I'm going to say I do not believe that the things that I experience or the thoughts that I have or the conclusions that I arrive in that state of psychedelic trip are any less meaningful or real or factual than any
Yeah.
sort of facts that you want to say that you claim to have perceived giving your limited equipment. You know what I mean? We got limited equipment,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah. So what I would say is like the objective reality that science and other people perpetually try to measure. Um, the fact that we can measure anything at all means that our subjective experience is very similar to like taking. It's like it's imagine reality is like this million by million canvas, right? And on this canvas, it's a very detailed formulaic pattern, and the pattern always stays the same throughout the entire piece of art. And what we're doing is we're taking a picture of a very small pixel of it, we're expanding it, and that's our reality.
Yep. I
That
like it.
doesn't mean what we're experiencing isn't reality. It's just not the sum total of reality. Like I watch a bird fly from a tree off into the distance. Um, like what's happened, like in order to sufficiently understand like all of what's happening, it would be like imagining the birth of that bird, every decision
Mhm.
that it's ever made to get to that point, the physics involved, and the body mechanics that allow it to fly, to interact with the air in such a way that allows it to stay. Like there's so much information there beyond what we're perceiving, but that doesn't. But the bird is still flying. We're still observing the bird flying, even though we're not observing the fundamental laws that make that bird fly, it's still flying.
Yes.
Um,
Exactly. We can't see the air, and you are bringing up things that I missed because in order to really observe objective reality, you'd need to be omnipotent but also omnipresent because you're only observing a slice of time or a slice of the
which is
earth or a slice of
which is Yeah, which is why I think like all of the contention between subjective reality and objective reality, the constant deliberation between the validity of the two, they're both missing the point. The point is aligning the subjective experience with the one we all share. Because every subjective experience in some form or another is real. They're experiencing what they're experiencing, even if they're trying to convince you what they're experiencing is real and it's not real, them believing and like they're experiencing these things, and it's not necessarily our duty to cast judgment on those who don't properly align it. It's us to show the path to alignment. That's how you create a world full of truth and understanding, not by shunning those who are ignorant, but by showing the way from ignorance to understanding,
hmm
you know. And when you were talking about our senses, one of my so like our senses are mechanism or measuring devices, right? So we measure frequencies. Our eyes, our ears, our taste, all of these things are both measuring frequency, but for the sake of convention, we separate the ideas: taste, sight, sound. It's all frequency, right? What I realized recently is that our emotions and our thoughts, they're also senses. They're also measuring devices for our experience. We measure our internal and our external experiences using those tools. Um, and it's like, I don't know, it just putting that into perspective, it's just like, I don't know, it amazes me. You know what I mean? It doesn't amaze me how people have certain perspectives and thoughts and differing and how they'll die on it. It amazes me how long we've gone thinking we're so separate fundamentally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And holding on to that separateness as a virtue and trying to fight for your side, for the other side. It's like unless you're fighting for everybody, including yourself, it just perpetuates the conflict forever. And that's what we see in history. That's what
Yeah.
we see cross culturally for hundreds of thousands of years. You know, I listened to Jordan Peterson talk about Babylon, right? Extremely interesting. You know, a bunch of competing city states with their own visualization of God and virtue. All of these different things that they deify, different ways of living, and yet they all amalgamate or come together under one God, one idea, one culture. And I mean, and that's recorded in history as a amazing event, something that's quintessential to all of our history, not just one place. It's fascinating how it's marked by the coming together of differing beliefs and ideas, And if you don't think that's so impressive, think about the amount of conflict we're willing to generate here for our beliefs and ideas. You don't think they would have done extremely gruesome and horrifying things under the name of their gods, especially in an age of lacking information, or
Yeah.
where you just had your experience? Get fucking real, dude. If 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 uh if amalgamating ideas and beliefs are so powerful to take warring city states, with warrior cultures, and bring them together under a singular idea and virtue, and orient themselves around, I mean, we should be taking better we should be paying better attention to the points in history where conflict was resolved as opposed to perpetuated. You know what I mean?
I do. And the first thing that came to mind when you were bringing this up is my neighbor has a bumper sticker that says, "Yes, you are completely unique and individual, just like everybody else." And
Yeah,
and so the sarcastic take on what a simple concept is, like, yeah, we are all unique. We all should celebrate that about ourselves and understand that we're all the same at the same time that we think we're all different. We're the same. Because we think we're
yeah,
different, we're the same. And with Babylon, the thought that comes to mind is you at one point had religion dominated the world, and it was the prism that we explain things through is the looking glass.
yeah.
So if the plague happened, God's mad. If the crops didn't work, God's mad. Now
Right.
science is now the thing that tells us why the world works the way it does. And so based on science, we now have huge disagreements and maybe wars based on differing scientific beliefs, but it's still the same thing. It's just a continuation of a prism that you view the world through, and you
Yeah.
say, this is how I perceive things, and if you perceive things through a different glass, even though we're looking at the same thing, we should go to war because, no, I see it different. It's like, can't we just exist together? Why can we never come together and just be kind
Because
of
in order for that to happen, there would need to be dialogue that takes place that
dialogue
seeks
and
to
understanding?
evolve understanding and truth.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, and at the root of it really is recognizing that both science and religion are attempting to describe the same thing from different um, methods. The scientific method is taking repeatable experimentation as proof for objective reality, and religion is taking individual experience as proof for objective reality. The idea that all of these people cross culturally are having similar experiences with something that's inherently unifying and suggests a fundamental interconnectedness between all people and all things, and they're trying, and that experience is helping them is make sense of the world.
Hmm. Well,
Having that experience individually, not somebody telling you that that experience exists and you're supposed to have it, but having it as a consequence of existing.
yep.
um, and all of that contention between science and religion rests on the conflict between knowledge and belief, like the individual conflict of knowledge and belief. And we haven't reconciled the idea that we'll always have some amount of both, because nothing is omniscient. No living creature has displayed omniscience. Therefore, there will always be a sum of knowledge and belief. And because there's no reconcile of that ignorance, both, let's say, in the science, those who are proponents of science or religion or both, not being able to do that is preventing the evolution of dialogue. You know what I mean? Fundamentally,
Well,
or at least that's what it appears to be to me.
in the time of religion dominating everything, what really pisses me off when I reflect upon that is most religions tell the same story. They have a flood, they have a prophet. It leads me to
Yep.
believe that there's probably a shared ancestral memory that all this stuff comes from. But because we speak different languages and we name things differently, we describe this.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Good.
So we have this shared experience that we all agree upon, but yet we still argue about it, even though it's the same story. Because, oh, your story's called this, and my story's called that, and it's like, I
Well,
I think that we can agree that there's likely some truth to it, and I just think that that would be more productive than arguing over semantics.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, on the same token, at least when it comes to like religious institutions, there are so many events in our history where like that information was either hidden, altered, or and manipulated in order to prevent the very thing I'm talking about, which is essentially that which is conducive to the evolution of consciousness. Um, and because when you take power when you take potential power away from the individual, that increases the authority you have as a religious institution.
Yep.
You know, there would be no people going to church for salvation and a connection with God, if everybody was experiencing that very thing as a consequence of their own experience.
Of daily
You
life,
take
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So by virtue, the individual gaining authority over themselves and their space takes away authority from institutions that claim that power. Like this is something that's been happening for hundreds of years. You know what I mean? So while all of these cultures cross-culturally have the same stories, there's so much information that was like hidden and manipulated as a consequence. And it also shows that a lot of it is wholly derivative. Like even though these things are happening in isolation culturally, it's not like they're coming up with new ideas. I referenced the 42 laws of Ma'at, which is essentially um, it's essentially like the Ten Commandments, but in
Okay.
Egyptian form and in negative confessions.
Interesting. I've never
Um,
heard of that.
yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm pretty sure it happened like be I believe it's I have to get the dates correctly, but the idea that a lot of these like tenets or these virtues are found cross culturally regardless of the religion that they're embedded in. um it just seems to me that all of these religions started out as individuals having, let's say, spiritual experiences, wanting to recording them successfully, and then the people who were responsible for that recording enjoyed the power that
Yeah.
telling the story gave them.
I would
Um,
agree that that's probably well described as far as what took place. They were used for power instead of shared
yeah, I
knowledge. It
mean,
became like you view it through how we say and join our team. You have to join our team. You don't
yeah, I
just
mean,
get to
logically
believe
speaking,
casually. You gotta show up.
you have to show up. You have to you say you're a believer of this God, of this religion, and if you don't, you'll be you'll face damnation.
Eternal
And that brings
hellfire.
me Yeah, that brings me to another thing. God's judgment. Very interesting idea. Humans like to cast their own judgment under God's judgment all the time. Um, very, very interesting. I could talk more. Are we even recording? You know
We
what I
are
mean?
recording. Why don't you go
Okay.
have dinner? We'll close this
Yeah.
out and we'll start with the next one. I love it.
All right. All right. Fantastic. We'll reconvene.
Sounds good.
All right, my brother. Thank you.
See ya.